was tacking into some of the trends that we were seeing start to hit big. And, the joke among a lot of the writers was that I know was, it's like, if your book isn't selling, can you put a dragon in it?
Welcome to the Two Authors Podcast, an entertaining chat show hosted by best-selling mystery and thriller authors Douglas Pratt and Nicholas Harvey, in lively, humorous and informative conversation with distinguished guests who share their thoughts and experience about forging a successful author career.
Hello and welcome to this week's show. Douglas Pratt, how you doing?
I'm good, Nicholas Harvey. How are you, sir?
I'm grand. I'm home. I'm back home.
How's the weather in Grand Cayman?
It is absolutely gorgeous. It's high 70s and partly cloudy.
Yeah, we're high 40s. We're high 40s here in Tennessee.
I was just in Oklahoma and North Carolina, and they were just saying how unseasonably warm it is, which we're quite...
It was last week, actually. Yeah, we had a really nice
Well,
place.
Cheryl and I were still freezing our asses off because it was still 50 during the day, and we were like, let's get home. So it's good to be home.
Yeah, I can imagine so. Well, hey, yeah, big thank you to all of our Patreon supporters out there. If you feel like you guys get some value, and you can support us over at patreon.com/the Two Authors Podcast.
Tons of bonuses. Tons of bonuses.
Cool extra stuff in there. And, you're just supporting us, helping us out, keeping us, in kibble. So
yeah. And big thank you to Vellum for supporting the show. You guys are fantastic. What was interesting? So I'm signed with Vinci Books, who are going to distribute the print editions of the A.J. Bailey series in the future. And we're working to get that all sorted. So, of course, I have to send them lots of information, including the manuscripts.
Right.
So,
well, they do need those.
They are going to need the manuscripts.
That book's
so I was able to send them the Vellum file because that's the easiest thing for them to work in, because that's what they're going to use to publish it. So they'll just drop in there, alter the front matter and back matter as they see fit, do anything else that they need to do within the confines of the file. So it was the simplest thing in the freaking world for me to do, instead of going back to my Word files, which don't have the front matter and back matter in it, because I built those in Vellum and all that stuff. So it was super simple. Once again, Vellum knocking it out of the park.
Vellum's always the best. They're great.
All right, let's get on with the show. I am giddy excited.
I know. You were like antsy. Look at you. Like,
we've been waiting for this. Has been planned for a long time to have USA Today and New York Times best-selling historical fiction author Kate Quinn on.
You're going to fangirl on her, aren't you?
Oh, big time. Big time. I'm going to be drooling. It is going to be embarrassing. You're probably going to have to just take over while I sit there giggling and pointing. So, but first, let's get to a listener question from our guest, the lovely Willow Winters. Willow Winters, thank you so much for sticking around for a listener question you're going to ask us. So lay it on us. What you got?
So what do you think the most disruptive thing you could do with elevating or changing your IP is going to be moving forward? I think in the past, something disruptive might have been a special edition or a discrete version. Before that, disruptive was just having a paperback for an indie publisher, because a lot of it was ebook. So moving forward, I kind of have some thoughts. I don't know if they'll be successful, but I have some ideas. What do you think?
Ooh.
It's a good question, because I'd like to figure that one out. I think there's a few things. Like you talk about, you're doing the graphic novels, right? I'm thinking that might be a fun way to get more people out in and drag them in. I think that's going to open up a little bit with AI. People will be able to do some of that differently nowadays. So I'm kind of curious how that'll flow. But I think that wouldn't be a bad one. I do like the idea of these full cast audiobooks. That those kind of seem like a really cool way to go too. I've been listening to the Dungeon Crawler Carl's, and his isn't full cast, but it's so well done that I was like, wow, I want to do something like that. So
I think episodal video with AI video is probably like, with Michael at Creative Wood and what he's developing, that's going to evolve very, very quickly. And I think if you're in the right genre and have the right stories, I think there's ways of adapting them, whether you do them as a graphic novel type look, or a cartoon type look, or a real life authentic look. I think there's some runway for that. And I think what we're going to see in the next couple of years is a lot of streaming services that are catering to that.
Yeah, I think you already are. I mean, you can put Amazon Prime allows you to put your own, you want to make a movie and put it up there. You can do it just like you do KDP. It's not quite just like, but I think you can do it. So it's that bar is lowered for getting there. Now you still have to pay to produce all of it, but it's still to get it out there.
Yeah, but that's going to evolve so quickly. I mean, it already has. It's going so rapidly, and it's like everything else. It's the more energy that's plowed into it, the faster it's going to get there. So, what are you thinking of, Willow? Because I'm more interested in what you have to
for sure
of this, because you're a lot smarter than we are.
Well, the graphic novels and animated graphic novels, so very similar to what you were saying, is one thing. And I've already started to put energy into it. It's just a matter of launching it correctly and having my team around it that can sustain it and grow it. But also something fun that I think would be very collaborative and disruptive moving forward is taking your IP and working with another author in a different genre and transforming it into that. So my romance thriller into more of an actual thriller. Yeah, transform it so the story is the same, but it can reach an entirely different audience for a different purpose.
Chase Gordon erotica.
Yeah.
Chase Gordon erotica.
Yeah.
Doug's character.
I'm down. I don't have a problem with it. So
yeah, I think that would be fun. And I'm already seeing, because you see Rebecca Yarros throwing pitches at baseball games for her Fantasy with Dragons book, right? There's absolute conversion, and people are buying these jerseys, including the players themselves wearing her sweatshirt on the way in to, while they're being paparazzi shot. They're organically doing this. There's a need for more art in the world. And I think the more collaborative we can be and the more accepting of different genres, I think the better.
Well, thank you for asking and answering better than us. A great question. All right. Willow, thank you so much for sticking around and joining us and giving us a question. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Kate Quinn, welcome to the show. This is an absolute joy to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you so much for having me. Glad we can make this work.
So give us a little bit of background on how you got started in writing and when you were first published.
I got started young, and I really attribute that to the fact that my mother was a librarian with a degree in ancient medieval history. So I was surrounded I was surrounded at a young age, by everything historical and everything book related, which is why as soon as I started to write stories of my own, I gravitated automatically towards stories of the past. So I wrote my first book when I was 10 years old, when I learned to type, and it's dreadful. It's completely awful. It will never see the light of day, but it did tell me that I loved doing this. And I, after that, was pretty much never without some sort of novel in progress. So I have a lot of, absolute dreck that lives under the bed, a lot of juvenilia, but it did result in, teaching myself the tricks of the craft. And by the time I got along to university, I was in Boston University in a very cold climate, a Southern California girl. So I decided I'd escape into first century imperial Rome. And I wrote maybe my 11th or 12th book by that point. And that one ended up about 6-7 years later being the book that nabbed me a literary agent, since I did start querying around this time as well. And usually, the way that would go was, I'd write a book and I'd look up anybody who was representing historical fiction, and, I'd query them all, and then they would all tell me no. And then I'd decide, well, I must write a better book then. So then I would write a book and another book, and I'd query that one, and everyone would say no. And I pretty much kept doing this all through the school years until finally I had a no that turned into a yes. And it ended up the book she ended up representing was that book I had written and retooled several times since then, but my freshman year of school. And that finally ended up getting published. I can never remember if it was 2009 or 2010, but that was when it got published under the name of Mistress of Rome. And that was the very first of my books.
And that ended up being a 4-book series, is that right?
Yes, it was sort of interlocked standalones. And so 4 books in ancient Rome, and then I took a 2-book jaunt off to Renaissance Italy. And then after that, I ended up pivoting and heading to the 20th century with the Alice Network and a lot of the other work since then, which has all been jumped over the various important historical points of the 20th century for the most part.
Right. And it was the Alice Network that got you a William Morrow contract.
Yes, that was when I started with William Morrow. I'd been with Berkeley before that. And the Alice Network was my Reese Witherspoon pick, too. So that, sort of bolt from the blue that changed my life.
That's kind of a helpful nod, isn't it?
Oh, it certainly was. I was one of the very first Reese Witherspoon book club picks, only maybe the second or third. And it was much less formalized then, than it is now when months in advance. At that point, I learned more or less the same time as everyone else did. So that was really quite something.
So I'm a little curious. So your literary agent that you had, was it one that you'd already queried before? So you just bothered them long enough and they're like, all right, fine, we'll take you, or was it a new one that you had?
I don't remember if I queried her for another book, but it was a no that turned into a yes, because I queried her and she tried the sample chapters for the book I was flogging, and she said no, she didn't like that particular book, but she was complimentary enough about my style in her no that I felt confident enough to say, well, if you do like my style, but not this particular book, would you be interested in seeing something else of mine? And I pitched the a novel of ancient Rome that was under the bed, which I kind of had as another arrow in my quiver. And she liked the sound of that. And then she read that. And then she said, well, it needs a lot of work. And she was correct. It was vastly too long. It had, something like 12 viewpoints. It was a variety, yeah. a lot of early writer, mistakes in there. It needed a lot of streamlining, but she said, if you can do some work on it, I think we could do something with this. And so, I got out the cleaver and I chopped it up and I put it back together. And then she read it and was like, yes. And that was the one she ended up pitching and, ultimately selling for my debut novel. And I do always think that has always taught me the value, I think, of having more than one arrow in your quiver as when you were a writer in the query trenches, because, sometimes they might not like what you're pitching right now. But if you have something else you can pitch, if they like your style, it's a way you can pivot from, ideally, a no to a yes.
That's very good. Yeah, because I think a lot of people kind of take the first no and just are like, oh, well, and then don't push forward anymore. So
it's a big step when you get a no, but.
Yeah, no.
Because normally it's just no or nothing, tumbleweeds, right?
I remember that it was very encouraging when I stopped hearing just form letter no's, and then I started to get no's with compliments attached. It's like I still remember one rather nice fellow who said, it's like, this isn't quite there. It's not quite doing it for me, too many modifiers, but it really is quite good. Keep going, good luck. And, that kind of thing starts to be encouraging when you just hear no, and then you start hearing no, but not bad.
Yeah. I'll take it.
Yeah, you'll take anything at that point. The query trenches are rough. You'll just be like, any crumb of approval,
true, yeah.
please.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're both full-time writers, but we're indies, so we our egos can't handle it. We're not as brave as you.
Well, I have to say, it's like I do still wish I had kept that one query letter, because there was one agent who, I had a very immaculate query letter, the type that was, I knew how to write one. It was all standard by the book. It was not too long. It was, as professional as I could make it. And I didn't even get a form letter. He mailed me my own query letter back with, no, I really don't think so, just scribbled across the top.
Oh, yes.
Ouch.
I remember thinking, it's like, I don't think I'm being a diva, but is a form letter too much to ask?
Yeah. Oh, man, I wish you had that. If it was me, I'd photocopy that and mail it to the guy and go, hey, this is from Kate Quinn. You may know me by now.
I admit I wouldn't do it, but I would be tempted.
It would be tempting, right? Yeah. All right. So this magnificent run of historical fiction that you've been on, so that's going fantastic, unbelievable. So you're going to change things up. So in the middle of February, you're releasing The Astral Library, which is a fantasy adventure. What on earth brought that about?
Really, it was just a random idea. It was coming out of lockdown, 2021, I think, when I sort of started playing with this idea. There was a title I had in mind. I liked the title, but there was no book attached. And that's odd for me. Usually I have a book first and, it just has some sort of working title until I can figure out a real title, which I'm never very good at. But yeah. I had this. It was a title. And then I thought, then at some point the thought floated into my head of, what if you could escape and live inside a book, inside your favorite book? What reader has not wanted to live inside their favorite book? It's something we can all answer. I am not a fantasy writer, but I am a big fantasy reader. It was kind of my gateway drug, as it were, because, before I could read myself, my father read to me, a lot, as a kid. And some of the first things he did read to me were the Oz books by L. Frank Baum, and then, the Narnia series by C.S. Lewis. And then, by the time I had got first grade and I was learning how to read myself, we'd read our way through both series, all of them. And then we were on to, King Arthur and the Round Table, so it's fantasy sort of, and the idea of this hidden worlds that are just, a doorway away. That was always something that, still kind of remains a weakness of mine. I went on to, classic fantasy, like Tolkien. I went on to, fantasy like Tamara Pierce and Anne McCaffrey. I went on then, to George R.R. Martin. Now I'm moving on to things like N.K. Jemisin and, G.R. McAllister. And I love to keep going with fantasy. And so the idea of being able to dip a toe in that water myself was really quite fun. I mean, historical fiction is where my heart lies. I don't think I'm moving away from that, but I do love a fantasy twist. And there is still, I think, that little part of you when a book really grabs you when you're young, where there's still a part of the adults that you become that still is regretful for all those hours that you spent poking around in the back of closets, hoping that you would find a door that would open up onto a snowy forest and a lamppost.
Well, I still do that though. So.
Oh yeah, I do too. Every time I come to a hotel, it's the first thing I check.
Is there any chance that this wardrobe actually works? And it doesn't. It always just holds clothes.
We're thriller writers, so we're really looking for the bodies.
But yeah, in any case, I think it was also came from, this is 2021, and lockdown is just starting to reopen. And I think the idea of, escapism, capital E, escape.
So you go to William Morrow and you go, guys, this has been a great run. Super. Yeah. But I've got this idea. How on earth did you talk them into it? Or did you let your agent do that for you?
Well, I pitched it to my agent first, and I was, I honestly thought 50-50, they'll just be like, no, thank you. Something else in the line of the previous, please. But she liked the idea enough to like, all right, it's out there, but let's pitch it. And I think I got a bit lucky in that, my editor read the pitch, and her response was, did you see inside my brain to like what my secret fantasies as a bookworm are? I think perfect. It was just her perfect variety of catnip. And, because she is a huge bookworm. And so I think everyone's reaction was sort of like, all right, this is different, but let's go for it. Let's do it. Let's try it. And it didn't hurt that this was when we were starting to see this surge in romantasy and fantasy and the idea of fantasy or other, various other genres with a twist. You're seeing, thrillers that have a fantasy or a magical twist. You're seeing romance with a fantasy or a magical twist. So why not historical fiction, which in this book does have historical elements in it where you're jumping to different time periods. So I could kind of keep my foot into that world a little bit. A little bit was tacking into some of the trends that we were seeing start to hit big. And, the joke among a lot of the writers that I know was, it's like, if your book isn't selling, can you put a dragon in it? And
That's
just
true, yeah.
By coincidence, the Astral Library does in its way have a dragon in it, even if not, like a Rebecca Yarros style dragon. So I think it was timely. And even if it's not a total new direction for me, it's been a very fun side quest.
Yeah, a dragon or some shagging. That was kind of the request.
Shagging.
Yeah, we spice it up a bit.
Or both.
A little bit, yes. Yeah, dragon shagging is always interesting. So evergreen. So I got a question. I bet I know the answer to this already because I can't imagine. But are you a plotter or a pantser?
I'm very much a plotter. I do a lot of outlining in advance. I do a lot of trying to get to know my characters in advance before I start drafting them. And this is because I have a theory that, the more plotting I do, the less likely and outlining I do, the less likely I will be to massively overwrite my first drafts. So I'm left with some 180,000 word behemoth, and I realize that my first order of business is that I have 60,000 words to cut out of a manuscript, which is not a fun set of edits to do. And this is an excellent theory, and I'm sure it's going to pay off at some point, and I will actually at some point be able to complete a draft that is not massively overwritten.
That was going to be my follow-up was do your drafts with that much outline, do they come up close to a finished product? But you already kind of answered that, or is it?
No, I tend to overwrite and then I have to trim down. And it's one of those things where, you end up slogging through your own manuscript, just culling words literally one at a time. It's the kind of thing where you look for a sentence where it says she turned her head and you just say she turned and then you fist pump because you cut two words out.
2 words down. She turned around, she swiveled. I got it.
Combine, condense. There is no sentence that you cannot cull down.
Yep, that's for sure. Yeah. So like, so when you're doing this, are you hammering out the research as you're outlining, or do you do all that research ahead of time and just kind of fill in some of the details as you're going along?
A bit of all of the above. The research is sort of before, during, and after drafting. I'll spend a few months at least just doing the reading, the deep dive reading that I need to do, where I'm putting my whole timeline together. I'm figuring out where in the historical record I want to form my story, because the historical record is going to be the framework of a historical novel. You have to put that in first. And, then you hang your fictional elements off of that, but that means you have to have your historical facts sort of laid out first. So that's what I do first. And then after that, it's layering the fictional elements on top, and then it's starting to draft. And then then I will still be researching, but it'll be more spot-based research where it's like, okay, what do I need to be able to complete this chapter today? Not big picture, but just this chapter today. And then by the time I'm, in my final stages of that, it's more about, frantically fact checking everything to make sure that I don't have some hideous historical error that has worked its way into the text, and which will result in me getting, angry or annoyed emails from readers who caught it and think that I am now a hack who did not do her research.
How dare you not? Yeah. So what's your, like, from basically kind of an idea for, because that's a lot of research. That's more than I would want to do. I like to just make stuff up. So that's science facts, whatever. I'm just like, whatever. No, I don't. But like from conception to, like, getting to the first draft, how long what's an average time frame for your books to go from?
Well, conception to first draft, there will be usually some months where the starting point of inspiration is quite often, it'll be some historical event, and quite often some historical woman or group of women who have done something astounding. Whether that is, I run across the Night Witch Regiment that was the all-female bomber pilot regiment that flew against Hitler's Eastern Front, or the women who were the code breakers of Bletchley Park, or, one singular woman who was, the most successful female sniper in history, who was a historical researcher and a single mother in Ukraine. And that'll be a point where I start and I think, wow, I wish I knew more about it. And the more I learn, the more I go down that rabbit hole, the more excited I get. And I'll start to think at some point, well, I could hang a story on that. And then I go deeper and I start pulling other material in, and I start messing it about and, like puzzle piecing various pieces of history together, because I always end up thinking, well, Bletchley Park is cool, but what else can I throw in, that I can pull in from the time period? And will that fit? This won't fit, but this might fit. I do a lot of puzzle piecing that way. And so that'll be more time as well. And then at some point I need to put a package together as to how the book would go. And then I need to pitch it to, my agent and my editor. And so, some things, then go back under the bed. Someone said no. So I've had things that have gone through several different iterations of possibilities as to how I might write it. And then finally, maybe 10 years later, they'll see the light of day, which is why I think, really nothing is wasted. And, you never know when it will have its day. So then when I get a thumbs up, like, okay, we want that Bletchley Park book, then it's down to the deep dive, and I need to now figure out how to put it on a page. That'll be a few more months. It might only be a couple if my research is relatively focused. For a really big book, it might be more like 5 or 6. Depends. It just depends on the book. And then, but at some point when I feel like I've got the world at my fingertips pretty well, and I have the characters and they're really talking to me, that's when I'll start drafting.
So I like, one thing I did like I can imagine is, what's the wildest rabbit hole you've kind of fallen into in the research? Was something you're like, oh, that's insane. Maybe something you haven't written about, but you're like, oh, that's kind of insane. And I because that's where my research problem is I'll start researching something and I'll be like, oh, wow, this is just fascinating. I'll spend the entire week just looking up stuff about that and then not put it in a book. So.
Yeah, that can be the danger. Research is always fascinating, and you can go down that rabbit hole. And you sometimes then have to be reminded, okay, you need to come out of the rabbit hole and meet the word count. I remember.
What? No, whoa. What's this rule that you have?
Yeah. Deadline? What do you mean deadline?
Meet the word count. Oh, no. It's
but I remember when I was researching Lyudmila Pavlichenko, who was the sniper known as Lady Death. She was the heroine of my book, The Diamond Eye. I really was, everything about her life gobsmacked me. This woman was the definition of larger than life. She had over 300 kills on the Eastern Front against Hitler's forces invading Ukraine. And that alone was, jaw-dropping. And then I learned that she went to the United States on a goodwill tour and became, best friends, as one does, with Eleanor Roosevelt. And I just thought, that is just the most odd couple friendship I have ever heard of.
Kidding.
It's like a PTSD-ridden, by that point, barely recovered from battle wounds, single mother and bristling, with, defensiveness, deadly female sniper, and the First Lady of the United States. And the fact that they got to know each other and they got to like each other, and, they exchanged letters afterward, and, they visited one another later. And this is the kind of thing I would never have made up as a historical novelist. It's like, oh, I'll just have my character become friends with the First Lady while she's in town. It's like, I would never have done that. I would not have dared.
It's unbelievable.
Which really goes to show that truth really is stranger than fiction. And quite often, I always say in historical novels, if you come across something that is really, truly batshit, that is the part that is the real part, because I guarantee you the author did not dare make that up.
Right.
Yeah. That's brilliant. Okay. So I love the Alice Network. I absolutely love the Rose Code. I'm a big Bletchley Park and Enigma kind of fan. Did you get to go to Bletchley Park when you were researching?
Yes. I knew before I even started drafting that book, as soon as I pitched it and my editor said they wanted it, I knew I would have to go. I don't always say you have to go to the places that you are writing about. I mean, you should if you can, obviously, but sometimes schedules get in the way. That pesky little thing called a budget gets in the way. You can't always go. But I did know I'd have to go to Bletchley Park. So in the stage when I was still trying to figure out what the plot of the book would be and what my focus would be, I went to Bletchley Park. I spent about 4 or 5 days there. I was taking pictures of everything. I was grilling the tour guides, and it was wonderful. I mean, that as a historical visitor site, it is marvelous. I encourage anyone, if you are in the vicinity of England, Oxford, or Cambridge, it is an easy train ride from any of those. You can easily lose a day there. It's so beautifully put together. It's thoughtful. It's curated. It's informative. It is like stepping into the past. They have mocked up a great deal of that site to look the way it would have looked in, 1941, 1942. So you do feel like you're walking right into the past. And really, it was a marvelous time. Some of the best, most enjoyable research I've ever done. And it almost gave me too much. The problem with that book and the reason
it's overwhelming, isn't it? There's so much. It's overwhelming.
And it was, it took me probably 5 or 6 months to hammer out what the book would be about, because it was just too much material. There are too many interesting people who I wanted to include. So it was about narrowing it down to a focus that would actually, make for a single volume. And that was difficult. So that was, I think, the biggest and most complicated historical novel I've ever done. It was a behemoth of a rough draft and required a lot of cutting and a lot of research. And that's one of the few times I've actually worked with an independent researcher. And I had an independent researcher who fact-checked me on this book because, the information was so technical, so complex, and there was so much of it that I really did think that, it's like I really wanted that extra coverage of someone who knew even more than me what this was about, because that was a book where I was tearing my hair out frequently because, thinking why is it that I thought it was a good idea to write something that is about complicated technological, mathematic, complex things when I am not in any way gifted technologically or mathematically. It's like I would watch these YouTube videos where, some cherry-cheeked Brit is, trying to explain the Obver enigma to me and saying, oh, no, it's really quite terribly simple. You see people
quite terribly simple, yes.
And I would keep watching it over and over, and I would just be sitting there like, this is not perfectly simple, Nigel. I don't care what you're saying.
It's just numbers.
That leads into what I was going to ask you next, Kate, which was finding that balance, right? Because you can't tell that story without having technical details. And no two readers, here's the other problem. No two readers are the same. You've got one reader over here that wants every little bit of it you can throw at them. And you've got the other reader over here who's just like blanking out when you get to the technical bits. So where do you find that
That's
balance?
me, by the way. I'm the one that's like, well, I'm just going to skim over this part. So.
I wrote a book that had motor racing in half of the dual timeline. And I had people send me a note and said, I just skipped over those chapters and went back to the present day. It's like, well, you kind of missed the story, but okay.
I imagine you do if you're thriller writers. I mean, there's lots of technical stuff that goes into mysteries and thrillers. I mean, there was a reason why I think I had a thriller element for the Briar Club, and I changed a whole plot line so that I could get out of having a detective as a main character, because I realized I did not want to research how to handle a crime scene in 1954 in Washington, D.C. And I was like, I don't want to research that. I'm not interested in that. No, I'm not using his viewpoint. I just can't make myself do the forensics on this part of that. No, but the thing that I realized, and it was kind of a big realization that saved my sanity in the Rose Code, which was that I realized that I do not have to teach the reader how to break Enigma codes. If they would like, they can go on YouTube, and there are lovely cherry-cheeked Brits named Nigel who will teach you how to break Enigma codes, and they will break that down in long, complicated videos. But I realized that is not my job as a storyteller to perform that kind of instruction and tell the reader how to be a code breaker, how to break codes. It is my job as a storyteller to tell the reader how did it feel to break codes. And so when I realized that I could pivot away from the technical details, so I'm not talking about the technicalities of it, I'm talking about how does it feel. I was like, okay, that's what's going to save me.
I love that description. That really is good, right? You just need to set the environment and the feel of being in that environment and the personal feeling that they get from being involved with it, which you certainly nail in Rose Code. It's gripping. So
I got to ask you, so you do dual timelines. Nick here does dual timelines. I don't know if I could deal with it, but I'm curious what your process is. I mean, do you like do one timeline, then come back and like fit it into your other one? Or do you kind of write consensually or straight through, like, bouncing back and forth?
I've done both. It kind of depends on the book itself. Every beast is different. I remember for the Alice Network, which is my first dual timeline, I wrote cutting back and forth between the chapters, which were 1915, half of them, and then 1947. And I liked doing that because it enabled me a little better to tease out the parallels between the two timelines and the stories that were happening in the two different generations. So that was useful for that book. But I remember when and I did the same thing for The Huntress as well, which was 3 timelines, because, I got cute with myself and I thought, well, if I could do 2, I could do 3. And then halfway in, I realized this was not a good idea. And I'm never going to get cute with myself and tell myself I could do 4.
Those are amateur numbers. You could go 6 easily. Let's just go across the board.
Rookie numbers
right there. Yeah.
So for that one, I also cut back and forth between them, and that worked well for that. But I remember when I got to the Rose Code, I wrote pretty much all of the wartime timeline first, and the slightly lesser timeline in that it took up less of the page space, at least till about the 80% mark. That was the post-war. And I didn't write that one as I was going through because I realized I didn't know what was happening in the post-war timeline yet. But there was that pesky thing called a deadline, and this book had already, the research process and the outlining process had already dragged out for something like 6 months, and I really had to get started. So I just thought, all right, I'm writing the wartime timeline first, all of it, and then I will figure out and wait for hopefully a bolt of inspiration that will tell me what is happening in the 1947 timeline. And that's how it worked there. So I've done both. It really depends on the book and depends on which timeline is dependent on the other. And book I'm currently drafting, I'm also in the same situation. I wrote all of one timeline first because I knew that. The other one was sort of dependent on what happened in the other. So now I'm going back and I'm having to fill that in.
That's always my answer is, how do you do it? Every way that you could do it, I've done it. Yeah. In the timelines.
I really think that if there's anything I've learned, it's that, and it's something I distrust vastly whenever I hear anybody trying to give writing advice by saying that this is the one true way. There is no one true way.
This is the rule. Yeah.
No, it's about finding what works for you and trying to see if you can provide that for yourself so you can get your draft done. But even for what works for you for one book may not work for another book.
I was gonna say, yeah, it's not consistent. I might pant. My last book, I just pantsed completely. This next one, I'm completely outlining. So it's just going to kind of depend on what I do for me. So you also did a co-write with Janie Chang. Was it 2024? Nick and I are always interested about collaborations because he and I write together. So we want to figure out a way that we can keep getting along. So we're kind of curious. How did the collaboration come about? And then, how did you kind of tackle the process of it, the plotting, the writing,
For that one, I had long wanted to write a book about the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, which I thought was really interesting as a disaster. And I knew some parts of it and how I wanted to lay it out. But the more I was looking at the research, the more I thought that this book needed a Chinatown heroine, because Chinatown was such a huge part of San Francisco at this point in the history. And it's a really fascinating part. And so much of it, really was completely destroyed during the earthquake and the fires that followed. So it was something that I could see the book needed, but I also thought, I'm not sure I'm the best set of eyes, the best pen to do a Chinatown heroine with the understanding of that history. So I was already very good friends with Janie, who she and I had met on a whirlwind tour of 3 authors, 3 events in Canada. Everything went wrong. We all ended up great friends by the end of it. And we've been friends ever since. And I love her work. And so I just phoned her up and I just asked rather tentatively, it's would this be something you would be interested in? Because I did some other collaborations before, but in bigger groups of authors, 5 or 6 of us, or 6 or 7 of us. And that's much more, you outline a whole book into 6 or 7 parts, and then you stay in your lane and you do some crossover, but it's still more you're writing your individual part that has to slot into a book in 6 parts. This I knew working with just one other person would be much more interwoven, much more collaborative, in all stages. So, I was a little tentative because my thought was I don't want to ruin a great friendship over, a book that over a collaborative project, because I have seen that happen and it's not pretty. So I thought, it's well, would you be interested? And she said, well, give me 10 minutes to do a little research and see if I like this period. I only think it took her about 5 to 7. And she came back and said, no, this is interesting. I could do something with this. And so we really approached it from the beginning as a real collaborative effort where we knew that we wanted to keep our voices separate. So we decided, well, we have very different writing styles, so we didn't want there to be trying to create a blended style. Instead, we decided, well, we will have 2 heroines. I will write all the chapters from my heroine's perspective. You will write all the chapters from yours. And then it doesn't matter if our voices are different because these 2 women are very different and they should sound different. So we could make that work for us. And then we decided, well, I'll create my heroine and I know who I want her to be. And you will create your heroine and you give her all the challenges or any of the background that you find interesting. And then we'll just throw these very different women into a pot together, add an earthquake and stir.
Right.
And that was the idea. We did a lot of plotting. I mean, both of us are firmly of the opinion that, a well-organized Google spreadsheet can solve almost anything. So we had all of this outlined on a Google spreadsheet where it was down to, you have this chapter, it covers this stretch of time and these events. And then therefore I know my chapter follows it and it covers this stretch of time and these events. And since we had that broken down, it meant that we could write somewhat independently. And then I could, we would throw our chapters up into a shared Google Drive to read as soon as they were done. So then we could be oh, I can use that detail. And then I can dovetail the ending of yours to the beginning of mine, my next chapter. And all of that worked out really well. So we actually had a great writing experience, but we were very careful from the beginning, to be very respectful of each other's words. It was it was our book, but it was my chapters and her chapters. And we edited each other very thoughtfully. And we really thought in advance about, okay, how do we want to work together? So I would say for anybody who's thinking about collaborating, give it a lot of thought. Like, how do you think you can work? Like, are you the type who's okay with other people changing your words up, or do you find that rude and annoying? And do you want to change your words yourself and you want feedback just in the form of comments? You know, do you want to try to create a blended voice, or do you want to keep your voice separate? What happens if one person has a catastrophe happen and they can't finish their chapter? What are you going to do about this? So give that kind of thing a lot of thought, because, you know, as I've said, I've seen friendships end over collaborations that went bad. So, but when it's done right, it's the most fun. I mean, I'm sure you guys have a blast.
We do. We have a lot of fun doing it. What's crazy, we did a presentation for Outlier University about doing collaborations. And basically, you just mentioned a bunch of the key elements that we put into that talk. It's a lot of think about these things beforehand. It's really easy to jump in there with a friend and go, hey, let's do this. And you just dive in and get going. And then one of those hiccups can be a major problem down the road if you're not careful.
I think we talk a lot about, like, it's a lot like a marriage. Like, you know, you have to get along and figure out how to make things work, and realize, you know, you're splitting up these responsibilities. And yeah, if you just dive in with just a random person, you know, that doesn't always work even in marriage. So surprisingly.
We've kept you for a long time. This is absolutely brilliant. I'd love to go on all day, but we have a little handful of questions to ask you to wrap up. So the first one is, what's next? So you've got the fantasy coming out in February. That's going to be a massive hit, I'm absolutely sure. And then what's next? Because you're probably already writing it, right?
Oh, yeah. I'm at like 80% mark maybe. And I'm drafting like mad. I'm trying to get my first draft done before I have to go out on tour for the Astral Library. We'll see if I get there or not. But it is back to my historical fiction wheelhouse. And it is a dual timeline that I have formed around a trio of friends in pre and post World War I. One being a combat surgeon who is very much haunted by his time in the trenches, never having been wounded, but having been very much affected by everything that he saw there. It is a mountaineer who is obsessed with the early 1920s push to get a team of climbers up to the summit of Mount Everest.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And yes, and then the third thread is a woman who is very much involved in the pre-World War I women's suffrage movement, the right to vote, which was messy, violent, and ultimately successful, but which has some absolutely thrilling stuff, and which I've been wanting to write about for a long time, and I finally found the right home for that story in the middle of the other two stories as well. So that I have no idea what kind of release date it would be, since I'm just still in the drafting process, but it has the working title right now of The Woman on the Mountain. You
pick three major events in history to blend into one book. I'm sold. So write it faster, because I want to
write it fast. I want you to add go 4 timelines. We just go all the way in. So
absolutely not. I 3 was enough. Three nearly put me in a padded room.
I did 3 in my first book I ever wrote. And then I look back and go, what were you thinking?
There's a lot of that what were you thinking, which hits in the, around the mid, like the 40,000 word doldrums. And you end up with this thought of, like back when you were blithely outlining the book or pitching it to your editor, and you just think, what happened there? What did I think? And it just, the only thing you could think of is, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
It seemed like a good idea. That should be the title of my biography, is it seemed like a good idea. So.
Oh, yeah.
So we do have another question that we ask everybody. Probably got a good idea what yours is going to be, but what do you consider to be your author superpower?
Oh, it's like, give me a moment to think about this, and we can edit the pause out. But
we can hum the Jeopardy tune if you'd like us to.
My temptation is to answer this facetiously and then to answer it honestly. Facetiously, I would say my superpower is the ability to overwrite absolutely everything. There is no storyline, no matter how streamlined, that I cannot turn into a 200,000 word rough draft. That's a superpower. I mean, it's a dark side superpower, but I can't deny it's a gift.
It sounds more like your kryptonite than the superpower.
I don't know. It's better than underwriting too. Like
absolutely,
that's the other side.
Yeah.
Trying to fill in a story once you've got it is also equally bad. So
I would say the thing that I do, I think that I do well, is that I have always liked multi-point of view books, multiple characters. And I love making individual voices for them so they sound different. And so they're, the minute that they open their mouths that like, oh, we've shifted to this character now. And I love a multi-point of view book because I like it to highlight the blind spots or to open the world up a little bit where especially with historical characters, especially when you're talking about women whose access is often limited, one character might only be able to see this much, like a small wedge of the pie. But if you try to do the whole book from that point of view, you're only seeing a small wedge of what is possible. So if I have multiple points of view and each character has a slightly different point of access to that world, you get different levels of visibility. You get different doors that open into different parts of the history. And a lot of historical fiction I see tends to be single point of view, which does make for shorter books. I did mention I massively overwrite. When you have lots of viewpoints, the word count crawls up. But it's worth it to me because I like to offer as wide a range onto whatever historical period I'm looking at that I can. And I think I'm pretty good at that.
I'd say so. Dual timeline is great for that too, because you have this perspective looking back and right now it's happening. So you can fill in details from both sides that make sense at the end.
You get hindsight at the same moment that you get the moment that those historical events are happening. You also get the hindsight on them.
Yeah. You can do wonderful little things like in the future. That person dies, but you don't know how or when, right? So, yeah. All right. Last question for you. Douglas has a wheel of questions.
Which I have today. So
yeah, which he has with you. And I must admit that we may have loaded this question for you. So it may be a wheel of the same question, but let's spin it anyway.
Yeah, they are loaded. We just specifically for you. So
we could barely hear it, Doug. We could barely hear it.
I got the new mic that only does my thing.
True.
So I can do it here and you can hear it. So
there is actually a physical wheel.
All right, it's got to stop. All right. I had spun it too hard. I didn't even know my own strength. Okay, so if you could travel in time as your current self to any period in history, where would you go, and like when and where would you go?
I would love to visit the Italian Renaissance. I wrote 2 books set there, and it is a period I adore because there's just this fantastic juxtaposition between the explosion of art and architecture and science and creativity and so much, and yet also the corresponding explosion of the violence and the coups, the politics, the battles, the soldiers for hire, all of that, which is that mixture of the blood and the beauty, I think makes it an extraordinary time. So if I could go back in time, take my vaccines with me, hopefully not get killed at the end of a pike.
I was going to say, pretty risky period, as you mentioned. It's like, well, you're different. Yeah.
You can't be too mouthy back then.
Yeah, but if I can get a little bit of safety both from the germs and the dangers of the day, I would love to peek back into that era. I do think it's a wonderful one.
All right, Nick, what about you? Do you have an answer for that? You also do dual timelines. I'd like to know yours.
I do. Yeah, there's so many you'd like to go back to, right? But I think I draw the line at like 1900 and going back before then just because of the bathroom issues. It just gets
honestly,
to be...
my thought was both of you nailed it. I was like, one, I do enjoy indoor plumbing, and I kind of want vaccinations. So, and then I'll follow that up with, I'm not spoiled, but air conditioning is awfully nice too. So,
well, you could always go if you want to go back, but still have the plumbing. You go to ancient Rome, and having written 4 books there, there is that thing. It's like their emphasis on daily bathing and the emphasis on things like running water and heated floors.
They actually developed a lot of like the air dry, the way they did their architecture. Those almost like built-in air conditioners to some extent, where they had that draft and stuff they could create. That
so maybe for all of us, if we do want to go back pre-1900, ancient Rome is the way to go.
Yeah, I don't want to die by a sword. I really have a phobia about being stabbed. So
don't worry. They got crucifixion. You could be.
There's that.
You could
too.
do that. You could also be impaled.
They pretty much had a lovely way to die back in those days.
Or you could die in the arena, torn apart by leopards.
Perfect note to end on. Torn apart by leopards.
On the other hand, we already know what it's like when the critics get hold of your books and you see those 2-star reviews. So sometimes. On some days, maybe you'd pick the leopards.
I'll take the leopard. Yeah, exactly. Brilliant.
No, instead, you're in a coliseum with the guy that gave you the 1-star review.
Yeah, you might get a poke in on him at least before he tears you apart. Kate, this has been absolutely brilliant. This is truly a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Astral Library, I'm sure, will be a massive hit, and good luck with the launch.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a delightful conversation. I feel like we could have chattered all day. So thank you for having me and for having such great questions. And thank you. I will, from your lips to God's ears, about the Astral Library. We'll see how it does.
That was fun. What a lovely lady.
She's great. She's so sweet.
Super, super, super. I truly am a big fan of her writing. I need to read The Huntress. Well, I need to read the other two.
That did sound interesting, yeah. So I was
The Huntress sounds fantastic. I need to dive in. I don't know why I didn't back. You know how we jump around reading stuff because we always have obligations of stuff that we're supposed to read, and you kind of get off of stuff and then go back and what have you. So, it was really interesting. And this is, with a lot of what I write, especially in the AJ, specifically in the AJ books, I blend fact and fiction, right? I take real world events, and stories in the dual timeline
and stuff,
and blend those two. And it's always interesting hearing somebody else talk about doing that and how they go about it. And she goes about it. I mean, she's writing about it. I try and find sort of off to the side events that most people may not have heard of. And she's hitting it straight down the middle. I mean, in major, big time historical events, and you've got to get that stuff right.
You do, and there's a lot of research. We did for my Ricky Talon series that I write with E. Chris Ambrose. We have a lot of history in that too because we're always hunting for treasures. And so you're looking for something that, for us, it's a lot. That's not anywhere near as the amount of research that she's going into that, because all we got to do is find a mystery that's out there, something that's missing. We get the facts around it correct, but then a lot of it becomes speculation on our part if we're going to find.
Yeah, your balance
treasure
is more fiction, less fact.
Yes. Yeah, right. Yeah, it would it'd be daunting for me. But it's amazing that the amount of effort she puts in, the amount of thought she is putting into it. I knew when I asked her about the plotting and plan, I knew that the answer for that right off the bat. There's no way you can write what she's writing and not have it planned out. And I liked how she talked about writing with that co-writing piece where she's like, we got it down to, this is what's happening in this chapter exactly, and kind of it's a feat, and it is a skill to learn, because I bet she didn't do that on her first one. So
yeah, well, we've talked about we talked about there's no rules, right? And there are no rules, but we've written our collabs together and we've plotted pants to various degrees, and the more we plot, the less stressful the writing process has been. That is definitely one thing we've learned. We still don't always do it because it doesn't work out schedule-wise and what have you, and we're kind of fitting it in. But there's no question in my mind that certainly working with somebody else, the more you plan and plot, the better, the smoother the process goes.
Oh, for sure. Even by yourself, I'm getting ready to sit down. This whole weekend is dedicated to plotting the next Coursera book I've got, so that when I come out on Monday, it's plotted and I can just start writing, and hopefully will speed me along. I find I write a lot faster when
it's laid out. Yeah, you've got a roadmap.
Yeah.
Cool.
I wish if I could go back and tell myself in the past, that would be the one I would do. Like, hey, plot.
Yep, plot some more. But each to their own. It works different for everybody. So this was a great episode. Kate was fun. Absolute awesome. Darling. What a pleasure to have her on the show. Support the show on Patreon if you would be so kind. Patreon.com/The Two Authors Podcast. That's where you'll find it. It's a safe environment for a couple of bucks a month. You can support us there and get bonus questions like we just recorded with Kate, and we do with all our guests. So drop in there and check it out. Your kindness helps us cover the costs of bringing the show to you each week. Big thanks to our friends at Vellum for their support of the show, because their support also helps us bring the show to you each week.
And we love the Brads.
We do love the Brads. You'll find the link in the show notes, as well as Kate's links, our stuff. And until next time, be cool to each other.
Fair winds and following seas.
You've been listening to the Two Authors Podcast with Nicholas Harvey and Douglas Pratt. Subscribe on your favorite platform for new shows coming every week.